I wanted a place for people to receive authentic guidance and practical ways to awaken. Thought-provoking, paradigm-shifting, and empowering. This is about expanding our human consciousness to create a wave of new possibilities. I'm Dr. Theresa Bullard, and this is Quantum Minds TV. Welcome back to Quantum Minds TV, where we take a deep dive into various perspectives on what it's going to take to create a shift in human consciousness. Now, in this episode, we are continuing the conversation with PhD scientist, Biofield researcher, psychologist, author, and teacher, Dr. Shamini Jain, who is the founder and CEO of the nonprofit Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And we are very much looking forward to continuing this conversation. This conversation is so fascinating. I love this. This is like really what the essence of Quantum Minds TV is supposed to be about, is this just dynamic conversation. Now, I really want to come back to some of your work, because we've talked about, you've mentioned mechanism several times, and it seems like the conversation is that there's many aspects to that mechanism. And so I'd like to kind of step our way through these aspects. And the first one is placebo. You've mentioned placebo, multiple times. You've done a lot of research on it. Scientists often say, well, it's just a placebo, meaning it's just kind of in your head. But I think that placebo effect by itself actually demonstrates the power of belief. Mm-hmm. And when, many of the pharmaceuticals, like when they come out with a new drug, one of their benchmarks is it's got to be at least as good or better than a placebo effect. Yes. So that right there shows placebo is a strong effect. And it brings that power of belief and the power of our own mind to influence our well-being. So how has this shown up within the Biofield research? And how does Biofield research also go? I think we've kind of discussed a little bit about how it goes beyond placebo, but what element do you feel placebo plays?
Well, I will tell you, I have a whole reframe of placebo, because I think it's even more than the power of belief. Mm. It's the power of consciousness. Mm. Here's what we know. We see placebo effects with drugs. We know we see them all the way to neural firing levels in the brain. Placebo effects are found all the way there. We know that placebo doesn't actually just follow one physiological pathway, but it's our prior experience, our conditioning, mm-hmm. if you will, that will actually drive where placebo shows up in our body. We know that we can see placebo effects in surgery. And we will see placebo effects in integrative healing approaches. So what is this telling us? Placebo isn't just about whether we're taking drugs or even surgery or not. They're showing up everywhere. And when we start diving into the nuances of placebo, which we've done in placebo research, we realize that these are fundamental healing elements that are related to our consciousness, not just our waking mind, but our consciousness. So I break it down like this. I say placebo equals healed. Holistic elements that activate life force. Life force, because I have a predisposition to thinking that the biofield has something to do with the writing of the healing reflex. For those who don't like that term, I tell them they can say holistic elements that activate salutogenesis, or the process of healing. But that spells hees. Hees isn't fun to say. Heal is more fun to say. But in all seriousness, when we break down what we've learned from placebo effects, we realize that yes, belief is a huge factor. It's what we often call expectation. That is my conscious mind expecting I'm going to see a good outcome from whatever this intervention is, the therapy, whatever it is. That's expectation. But there are other layers to this. There's conditioning, which often happens not just on a conscious, but also subconscious learning process. And conditioning is really easy to understand. If I went and got a massage from someone and I had an amazing experience, my body was so relaxed, I felt great for days afterward. The next time I get on that person's table, my body mind is automatically going to relax, because it's got the visual cues. Oh, this person, this room, this table. I'm already relaxed before that person even begins to start working on me. That's conditioning. There's ritual. powerful effects with ritual, and everything is a ritual. Even going to the allopathic doctor's office is a ritual. White coat hypertension is based on a ritual, so there are rituals in everything. Rituals have powerful effects, and they're considered to be part of placebo. And relationship, there are studies showing that just how our doctor interacts with us will affect how long we might hold the common cold. These are randomized controlled, trials looking at the effects of just doctor-patient interaction on outcomes like response to the common cold. When we look at all of these elements, what we begin to understand is that we've been looking at it from the wrong lens, because the old view of placebo literally meant I shall please the patient. That's what placebo means. I shall please, right, in Latin. So the idea was that you were appeasing the patient, but you weren't really curing them. Nothing really was going on. You were just making them calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we know from psychoneuroimmunology that when you calm a person down, it actually has an effect on their physiology. But more importantly, placebo effects are profound. And I get into all of that, as you know, in the book. How profound? Quite profound. Quite profound, clinically profound. So the old idea that placebo is just a pleasing thing and doesn't have any real clinical effect is untrue. But now, Theresa, with placebo, here's the other thing. Most of us think placebo, we've tricked the mind into believing something, and, we didn't really get that therapy. We didn't really get that pill. We didn't even get that surgery that we thought we were getting, but we thought we did. And so that's why we got better. What if I gave you a placebo? What if I gave you a placebo pill? And I said, Theresa, I'm going to give you a placebo pill. And placebo has been shown to have powerful effects because the placebo acts on the mind and body connection. And that's really profound. And so placebo studies have actually shown that just by taking a placebo, it's possible you might get better. And so you enroll in this trial and you know that you might get a placebo. And let's say you did. You didn't know you might be getting the real drug or the placebo, but you know it was possible that I might be giving you a placebo, right? Yeah. But then I actually give you the placebo and I say, you're getting a placebo. I'm not even tricking you now. I'm going to give you the placebo. I'm going to tell you this is the placebo. What do you think would happen?
Is it going to work as effectively because the person knows they're getting placebo and they trick themselves out of it, or do they still believe, right?
Well, so our colleagues at Harvard and other places have been doing these open label placebo studies with people with chronic low back pain, cancer-related fatigue, and other ailments. And they have demonstrated, and they have published these studies, and they're doing larger trials now, that even when people are told they're getting a placebo, they show benefits over and above the waitlist control groups that are clinically significant. Reductions in pain, improvements in quality of life. Now this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but this is absolutely true. Carvalho et al. from Harvard, who did this original study with open label placebo for chronic low back pain patients, followed these people 5 years later. Study is over. People were told they got a placebo. They found out it actually helped them. The study results showed that the placebo helped them. Then they connected with them 5 years later to just see how their pain was, their quality of life, comparing them with the active group and who got like a painkiller, and the waitlist control group who didn't get anything. The placebo patients still were doing better than the waitlist control group 5 years later.
Wow. I love it. It showed them the power of their own consciousness and their own mind to know that they can, be better just by shifting their attention on it. Wow.
You got it. So right back to the empowerment, right? What did they learn? Why would this happen? It's not magic. They were shown how powerful their mind body was. Wow. And so maybe they engaged in behaviors that actually allowed them to facilitate a deeper mind body connection to heal from chronic pain.
Mm.
So placebo, is vast and rich. And again, with this idea of, just not a singular type of thinking, I say we need to stop thinking about placebo as either or. Either the drug or the Biofield healing works or it doesn't, because we're comparing it with placebo. It's the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
Placebo are fundamental healing effects. Mm-hmm. What we ought to be doing is examining those healing effects as potentially the real drivers of effects, and then looking at how is my intervention augmenting that healing effect.
Right.
Whether it's a drug or whether it's Biofield healing. So it's a both and, it's not an either or.
Yeah. So, that's perfect. So the driver, the placebo, might be the consciousness driving the improvement. And then everything else we do beyond that is the, amplification, right? The added effects on top of versus just a replacement of. But this also brings us to nocebo. What about the opposite, the reverse, when people don't believe that they're getting, the effective treatment, and how does that play in?
So here's what we know about nocebo effects. They're powerful. In fact, sometimes they're more powerful than placebo effects, according to the data. Why? It's conditioning. There is a strong linkage between some of our amygdala activating circuits, right? That sort of grasp, effect in the body mind, right? That is the driver of nocebo effects, as well as the driver of anxiety, depression, all of these things. So nocebo effects are powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so we can minimize those, though. That's the key. Once we understand what causes a nocebo effect, there are ways to minimize the potential to have a nocebo effect.
Mm. So, with nocebo, it shows how fear and negative beliefs, negative attitudes can actually weaken and break down the immune system and lower our own subjective assessment of our quality of life or whether we're okay or not. And these control and affect so many things in our lives. And then you bring that to, for example, our recent experience of COVID-19 and how much fear was being driven by media and by authorities and so forth around it. And I'm not saying that there wasn't a real, concern to be aware of, but there was a very intentional campaign to create more fear. Uh, Maybe because they didn't believe people would actually respond to it if they didn't. I don't know. They might have had their reasons, but still, we noticed and we saw that there was a definite nocebo effect that happened where people, as soon as you hear someone cough or sneeze, oh my God, it must be COVID, right? Or, they get a little bit of a sniffle and, oh my God, I must have COVID. I got to go to the test. And so there was this, how much of a nocebo effect might have been coming in to that? And is there any data that shows people believing they have a disease? They don't actually have a disease, but they believe they do. And then they even die from that because they've created a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is that something that there's
So
data?
as far as the data goes, I'm not aware. I suspect there are case studies. I know that there are very interesting case studies, for example, of people who have multiple personality disorder who can manifest a physical disease through one of their personalities. And then wildly, when they're not in that personality, the disease is not there. So again, the strong power of the mind-body connection, right? Incredibly strong. And to your point about COVID and in general, how do we deal with the scare tactics, right? How do we deal with the fear factor from our media? We certainly saw it in COVID, but we're still seeing it. We're still seeing the spread of bad news. Most of the news is all about inducing fears about climate change. Climate change is real. I mean, we do need to report on it, but most of what is being reported in the media and in mainstream news tends to elicit a contraction in us. And it's a real contraction. We use that term often in the spiritual sense, but the reason we use it is because it's also an energetic phenomena. How does it serve our biofield? Our fields shrink. Our attention focuses and becomes more narrow. Our, again, nocebo response is more activated because we're activating the amygdala. We're potentiating the effect for a greater nocebo effect because we're literally getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then, of course, many of my colleagues would say, because when we become smaller, it's easier for people with bigger auras to then lead us, right?
Yeah,
My
agenda.
healing teacher likes to say the biggest aura wins. The truth is the biggest aura is the earth. And so that's where we can always come to for our healing work, right? When we need to release our fear, release our anxiety, and kind of come back into our greater wholeness. The earth is always a beautiful and neutral, loving place for us to come in connection with. But this is very real, what you're saying. Nocebo effects are absolutely propagated through fear factor. And so when we recognize that that may be happening, it's best for us to first tap into our bodies, tap into our subtle awareness. What am I physically feeling right now? Do I feel clenched in my stomach? Do I feel sick to my stomach? Do I feel cut off from my vital life source? Can I feel my legs? Can I feel my feet? Am I in my body? Bring ourselves back into our body so that we're not just spinning literally up here, right? In the mental space. We're bringing ourselves back, harmonizing through, as you mentioned, long exhales, sound making, bringing that vagus nerve back into its reflective state so that we're having a more harmonious mind and body connection, allowing our heart rate to slow down. All of those things are going to minimize the effects of the fear factor, the fear onslaught. And then, you know, for some of us, it's just turn off the TV. Not
Yeah.
this show, hopefully, but
I mean, well, exactly. So much of media is driven because they realize maybe nocebo effect actually has a stronger effect on us, right? It creates drama, fear, addiction, addiction to the drama, and people can be more like in a state of either ability to be controlled, manipulated, right? Programmed at the subconscious levels more, and this is no wonder why so many people are having anxiety issues and depression issues. I mean, if they're exposing themselves at all to the media, whether it's on mainstream media, news channels, or social media, I mean, there's so much bombardment these days with these negative influences that are telling you, that are basically stimulating the amygdala to hijack the rest of the brain and body to put us in that fight, flight, freeze. And so that is not to say that we can be victims too, right? This is a choice that we are engaging in those sources of information, or we're engaging in the drama, and there's that addiction, and that's for us to overcome.
yeah.
And recognize that we ultimately are the ones making the choice to engage in that or not engage in that. And that's where I think, again, practices, and I love what you just shared there about grounding, that there's some practices or some key things that we can do to help bring ourselves back into a state of parasympathetic response or relaxation, a sense of peace. We could say a sense of coherence. Like a lot of disease is disharmony, right? A lack of coherence and incoherence in the system, whether it's physical or energetic. And so many of these healing modalities are bringing us back into that harmony, back into that coherence, back into that state of wholeness and balance. So, when we look at the ways that our consciousness can affect our ability to heal, you mentioned in your book, and I'm just going to hold your book up here for a moment. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. Just saying. So when we are, you mentioned three keys, I would say, that really are in common amongst all the various energy healing modalities that we can all do for ourselves as well when we just recognize that these three keys are. So the first one you said was grounding, recognizing we got to get in the body, and also connecting to the earth, which is the biggest field or aura, so to speak, and centering ourselves to open up to a higher state, a higher order, a higher consciousness. What else would you say are some of the keys for these healing modalities that they all have in common?
Many, many different ones. And I've synthesized here in the healing keys, which is the third part of the book. It's really putting things into practice. And I've drawn from ancient wisdom traditions, spiritual traditions, biofield healing practices, and also clinical psychology, because we want to come into a wholeness from all of these dimensions of our being, as we talked about. So grounding is key, getting embodied, feeling our bodies, feeling our energy all the way into the body, because we want to be an anchor for the spiritual energy to manifest in the physical, right? And so we can work with our harmony with the earth to do that. Many practices that I share there are many, many practices from many traditions. And then the ones that I think we really shouldn't omit, especially as we are addressing these very issues that we talked about, the fear factors and whatever, are flowing with our emotions. And so there are ways that we can actually work with the energies of our biofield, the energies of the second chakra, but not just the second chakra, but the second chakra being very powerful here, and the flow of water, the elements of water, to allow the emotions to ripple through us without getting stuck or feeling like we're slaves to our emotions or that we're only our emotions. Emotions are beautiful information, and there are many ways to harness the beauty of emotions and not be afraid of them. So there are practices, very fun and easy practices that we can use with breath, with sound making to do that, which leads us into the reservoir of creativity. I cannot stress this enough. And this is my personal reflection, but I think would be affirmed by many. And that is that we are coming into a time where the healing that is taking place on a societal level and a collective humanity level is all about us coming into our co-creatorship. In order for us to come into our collective co-creatorship, we first have to recognize and experience ourselves as the creators we are. That means all of us. And so tapping into our creative wisdom and our creative experience is absolutely key for our personal and collective healing. So that's one of the healing keys. Fostering strong intentions. I drive from the placebo research here, but also the ancient wisdom, again, of uniting our mental and vital forces. We're talking about stuff, pardon me, that is beyond the secret. Right? We're not just talking about physical manifestation of our desires, but really tapping into the nature of desire itself, its relevance to us being human, and how we can work with the nature of desire, which is part of our human consciousness, in a way that allows for powerful manifestation and co-creation. So that's a fabulous healing key to dive into. When people experience really wonderful things. I can't say enough about the importance of the healing key of connection. And so we dive into that in the book. We explore not just the nature of the science of human connection, which is vast, but how to harmonize our relationships, including our relationships with the spirit world, to help guide us, right, through our process, our healing process. And then the final, and certainly not last but not least, but perhaps the most vital key, pardon the pun, to all of this is the key of surrender. Because ultimately, you know, we have to release our egoic attachment to all of it in order to receive the full guidance. And why do we do that? You know, people question, well, what is the surrender? I get this a lot in my workshops, especially for people who aren't familiar with this, or, you know, it's very triggering for some people. Sacrifice, surrender, you know, mind control. No, not at all. You're actually coming into a larger sense of your own consciousness by allowing for some egoic surrender, even of your desires and will. And so there are practices I do that are really the beautiful group practices that we do in our workshops sometimes, you know, that allow us to create a field of safety for collective surrender, which is beautiful. But it's also a practice that we can do as we tune our own inner alchemy with these energy centers. You know, as you could tell, many of these sort of follow a chakra-based framework where we're really going through the body energetically, going through the field energetically, so that we're preparing ourselves for that last step of surrender. And it's a joyful surrender where we begin to taste into the nectars of bliss from a release of what we think we know.
I love how there's so many parallels between, you know, how you've like learned to do it through an Eastern approach, and also what I've learned to do through a Western approach, and the Kabbalistic tradition, and so forth. It's all alchemy, you know, and this is why I love, you know, the language of alchemy, because it is so universal. And we see these keys, you know, these same keys coming up again and again, you know, no matter what tradition you're working from, they're all these same universal pieces. And that surrender, you know, piece is so key, because it's, you know, we have to let go of control and recognize that we're co-creating. We're participating in something that the universe is trying to help us with as well, or that spirit is trying to help us with. And so you've touched on some keys here that are going to help us open up to receiving our own healing. But also I would say that a lot of these play in as a healer, sending that energy to others as well. There's the process that we would go through as a healer to ground ourselves, to center ourselves, to open up to that flow so that we can be a good and clean conduit. And then there's that connection to the spirit, to, you know, maybe asking for permission or calling in some kind of spiritual support, which you've also highlighted in your book. And again, that's the conduit essence. It's not about me as a healer. It's about, I'm just that vessel, or that conduit for it to flow through for this person's well-being, so that they can, you know, make the most of it, receive the highest good from it, and so forth. And then there's that setting of that intention to support their healing, to facilitate. There's the you mentioned intention, attention, and will in your book, right? The intention to heal, the attention to what the person who's receiving the healing needs, whether it's feeling, scanning, however people do that within the biofield, whether physically, in person, or remotely. And then there's the willful direction of energy. And that's where I think there's, beyond placebo, and beyond just sensing, or just laying on of hands with touch without the attention of the actual will to send the energy. There's something that comes in with that willful direction of energy, of the healer into the biofield of the person, that maybe it's the part that gets beneath the skin, so to speak. Our will is a huge piece of our power, to create from consciousness. And this is something that I think that we really dive into deeper, understanding how to master, how to harness that will as we step onto, a spiritual tradition that has a long path of understanding, ancient traditions and so forth. And so is there any other keys that you would say for people who want to be better healers beyond what I've just shared, kind of in summary of some of the things you've shared in your book? Is there anything else that you've discovered for those who want to be better healers, whatever tradition they're working with? What would you say are really important keys for them?
Well, I love how you frame the healing keys for the healers, because it's true. These apply to the process of being a healing facilitator for someone else as well as for yourself. I think the only other thing that comes to mind that I've noticed is this profound curiosity, to stay with the curiosity of the process, because often, you hear this from healers, when we're more open to whatever transpires, instead of saying, oh, I've seen this kind of person before, I know what to do, I'm going to niggle here, I'm going to do this there, I'm going to, fluff here, I'm going to, it's like when we get too attached, I think sometimes, to protocols, and we miss the person. Just sort of being open again to the experience. Many of us will have experiences of guides, for example, coming through us, working, and, oh, okay, you're here. Oh, what are you going to show me? Something new. So just always being open to that novelty, which I think speaks to the creativity piece, the open curiosity as a healing practitioner, or a scientist for that matter, is also very key. But, obviously the fundamentals: grounding, centering, allowing, connecting, surrendering, are vital to the process of being a good healing facilitator.
I love that. Great. So curiosity, openness, just allowing and being present with the person and what's needed in the moment, versus only just ever the protocol. Because even within a protocol, there's still the individual and what they need. Right. Now, if I may, I'm going to use your words, because you had a quote in your book that I thought was just so insightful and really profound. And so I'd like to share this because I want people to hear this. So I'm going to be, your ventriloquist for the moment, and just say your words, because this is just so beautiful. You said, in essence, biofield therapies, energy healing brings us closer to the depths of consciousness. And from there, many outcomes are possible, which might or might not include physical healing. And so looking, though, at all aspects of the whole person is important, because healing isn't just about getting rid of disease. It's about providing peace and returning a person to a state of wholeness. That so summed it up so beautifully. And just, there's such essence and insight, that I think is a reflection of how much you have really, immersed yourself from the science as well as the experience, and really taking that whole perspective, that holistic perspective. So I guess, we've been going for a while, but I do want to, I think people are still kind of asking about this mechanism, because you've planted that word so many times. And I think that, as in relation to this quote you've given, you said that we should be, in essence, like redirecting or redefining our expectations of what the measurables should be, or what we should be looking for in terms of mechanism, trying to really look at it from the total benefits, from the systems-based approach. And so we've talked about placebo and nocebo, and there's also ways that you have seen, though, that there is like a framework within the, we've talked about etheric energy and the physical and the non-physical, or the biofield, but it also, there is a medium inside the physical body that is very physical, but seems to be a mediator between these energies from whether from consciousness or the outside into the inside. Can you share a little bit about, you mentioned three things in your book, I think, that are potential mechanisms.
Absolutely. So an overview, just here's the point from my perspective. I don't think that it makes sense for us to just choose one of these. And I say this in the book. So let's just break this down and try to break it down super simply, right? First, could placebo effects or just therapeutic interaction, connection between people, for example, expectation, all these things that we call placebo, could those explain some healing effects? The data says, yeah, they do seem to explain some healing effects, but not the whole picture. Okay, so we know that. Could electromagnetic fields, could we reduce this down to measurable electromagnetic fields that are emanating from healers and say it's these electromagnetic fields that are entering from here that are somehow having an effect on physiology that are driving effects? Possibly. Possibly. And the reason I say that is because we have some studies, for example, with EMF devices, where we see again those same fluxes in calcium ion channels. We have at least just one study so far with healers showing effects on calcium ion channels. Maybe we'll have more in the future, hint, hint, of these kinds of studies. So maybe there's an EMF effect. Okay.
And the biophotons as well, you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe there's an effect of some kind of direct energy that's being emitted. Again, the question is, how is that energy being emitted and affecting the sun? And we're going to get to that because I know that this is where you want to go with this. There's also the quantum physics approach, including entanglement. How do we understand that? But then this fundamental question, I think, Theresa, that you're asking of, okay, I've shared with you studies at this point. Energy is getting under the skin. How is that happening? How is it happening? And all I have at this point, and I say this in the book, are bits of pieces of a puzzle that yet to have to be all put together. But there is plausible information to suggest that energy is somehow being transduced under the skin, and it could be local and non-local, which sounds absolutely wild, but it's possible, right, that this is happening both locally and non-locally. For example, and I was not the first person to think of this at all, but it is something that I would be interested in seeing more investigation of. We have certain types of cells on our skin called Merkel cells, and Merkel cells have generally been studied in the context of cancer, Merkel cell carcinoma, for example. But if you study Merkel cells, which are actually part of the skin and part of the epidermis here, what we learn is that they actually do send signals through the skin all the way into our nervous system, including our brain. And they are sensitive to magnetic effects. We have a sense that, we already know that there are magnetoreceptors in animals that allow for homing devices. We know from studies that have been conducted at Caltech that we can manipulate the magnetic field around a person's head and change their EEG signal. So you spoke of, for example, MEGs, so that measure the magnetic field off of the body and off of the brain. Well, we can actually do kind of the opposite in this case, which is manipulate the magnetic field outside of the head and shift the brain waves. So we know that we've got to have some receptors that are very sensitive to these magnetoelectrical effects. Okay, we just haven't really dove down into that. So it's plausible then that we have these cells that we have evolved to have from, animals up to humans, where we're sensing these fields in subtle ways that are sending signals that shift the firing of brain waves, potentially then activating the vagus nerve, activating our bodies, but also activating immune signaling. So one of the areas that, our dear friend Neil T, so I know you know well, has discovered lately in the field is the discovery of the body-wide interstitium, which is essentially a fluid-filled cavity which appears to connect all of these organs. So we've talked about interstitial fluid between, in like kind of a more circumscribed way. And we know from looking at this, and this comes out of Jim Oshman's fabulous work over the decades, exploring this living matrix, as he called it, the cell communication that could be happening, where we're seeing essentially shifts in ionic charge that could be happening across these membranes that are then driving cell trafficking in different ways. So we could potentially see from these shifts of ionic charge, because the body is so filled with water that, as Mae Wan Ho alluded to, If we are altering through the energy healing, our sensing of these electromagnetic fields in some way, the charge across these cell membranes, we're allowing for cellular communication to take place, the driving of certain cell behaviors, affecting our lymphatic system and potentially our nervous system. These are big and I'm going to call it hand waving. This is big hand waving theory at this point to me personally. I'm not satisfied with this as a scientist. I was even nervous, honestly, about putting it in the book because I thought this is probably just going to sound absolutely insane. It's just little bitty pieces of data from, a couple of studies that I'm trying to put together here to explain it. I really hope that we'll have the opportunity to look at this in more detail. And Theresa, I would be remiss to not share the relevance of some of the work that is going on at Tufts University in relationship to this conversation, because it's very relevant. And Mike Levin is a colleague who is doing fantastic work in what I would call biofield applications for regenerative medicine. So he has a whole wonderful center for regenerative health. He is just an absolutely amazing thinker and scientist and interested in the biofield, but more from sort of at this point, the measurable aspects of it. We actually interviewed him for our Science of Healing course, which we offer at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. It was a conversation with him and Lorenzo, who's doing this work on healers. Mm-hmm. And I dare say, I think we're going to be seeing some collaborations between them, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. Yeah. But what Mike is doing and what he's learned from his work with planaria is that cells not only have an intelligence, cells are working in community. And cell-cell communication is happening bioelectrically. So the idea that cells are communicating electrically in powerful ways is not a theory. It's absolutely happening. And what Mike is discovering in a nutshell is that cell-cell communication bioelectrically has the power to grow new neural tissue. And he's actually able to sort of manipulate that, if you will. In our course, he goes over all of these different ways that he's exploring how cell communication electrically can actually allow us to potentially prevent cancer, grow new neural tissue, potentially create what he calls nanobots, which are eternal living beings that he's creating for planaria. I mean, it's just wild what's going on over there. Yeah. But it's all happening bioelectrically, right, is the point. So there is strong bioelectrical communication that's happening between cells. We know that. We know that biofield effects are happening on the cellular level. We know they're happening all the way down to cell signaling levels. We know that distant healing is actually real, right? The data is mixed on distant healing in terms of clinical applications, but we know from more cellular work and other distant healing work that there is this influence on physiology. Mm-hmm. So to sum it up, I would say when we talk about mechanism, we can't talk about a singular mechanism, in my view, because we're seeing effects in all these ways. We're seeing them on non-local ways, physiological ways, even placebo effects. Because again, back to our conversation, we're multidimensional. Healing is happening on multiple dimensions, and that's really the point. And again, I think the joy of the work, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it. I see you like, there's all these puzzle pieces floating out there, for possible ways or possible aspects to how it all kind of comes together. And the work that you're doing and with your consciousness healing, initiative, your Chi Institute, it's like you're becoming this hub to help bring those puzzle pieces all together, make connections and help everyone who's trying to do this research. They've been feeling probably rather isolated in that effort, except for when they can find like-minded people at conferences. But now you're becoming a hub for that to happen, that coming together. And so that's such a huge mission and service that you're doing for the world and for the evolution of medicine. There is in this new era that we're entering into, I believe there is a new medicine coming forward, and it involves, there's a place for allopathic medicine. There's a place for integrative and complementary, and there's a place for biofield healing work. And all of it kind of comes together to really treat the whole being and the whole person. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Now, but you mentioned also, and because I'm a physicist, I want to ask this question. How do you think that quantum principles and the consciousness of the observer effect plays a role, especially when it comes to the distance healing work, which might be happening through what Sheldrake calls like a morphogenetic field or a collective consciousness connection?
My short answer is I have no idea. I like to say I'm not a physicist. I don't pretend to be one even on TV, so I'm not going to even venture that I know the answer to this, but I do know, from looking at the data that what we used to think was only happening in microscopic systems is now happening in biology, and that's entanglement. So we're seeing these effects of quantum entanglement on macroscopic systems, including living systems, including plants, even entanglement like behavior in fish. There's also something called the radiation induced bystander effect, or REIB, which I'm really fascinated by. But essentially, these studies have been conducted in cancer where they're realizing they'll radiate one part of the body for cancer, but then there's another part of the body that's actually responding to it as if they got the radiation. And I believe that has a lot to do with the interstitium and cell-cell communication happening through the body. It may not necessarily be quantum in the way that we're thinking of it. And yet we are seeing quantum-like effects, is the way that I think we would describe it, in these biological systems. So is it possible that the healer in this case is essentially the observer, and that through this so-called directing of energy, they're helping facilitate this collapse, right, of energy and information into the body mind of this person to somehow foster a healing effect? Again, lots of hand waving going on from my perspective with an answer like that. But I would love to hear your take on it, honestly.
So, the quantum principles are really showing that, and I think that there are more and more experiments starting to come in to show that the consciousness being directed with intention and focus and coherent thought, directing it to be sent to a target with a particular intention is showing measurable results and impact. One of the fathers of quantum physics, and it was either Schrodinger or Pauli, and they were asked, how many minds are there? And his answer was, there's only one mind. There's only one mind. And so through our state of consciousness, we send thought, and there is only one mind. So it comes in maybe to the mind of the receiver as well, because we're one mind. It's all connected. And that effect can shift the observation, the observer, within the individuated sort of expression of that one mind. One of my frustrations actually when I was in graduate school, I wanted to start studying this. I actually approached my one of my advisors when I was thinking of shifting my research from neutrino physics to something else. And I was really exploring more into my own spiritual awakening. I said, I really would like to study the quantum physics correlations with things like consciousness and neuroscience or biophysics, really where these two intersect. And unfortunately at the time, he wasn't my advisor, he was one of the mentors. And at the time he was one of the chairs of the department. And he said to me, please do not embarrass this department with such pseudoscience.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Yes.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, that it was not the time, but it has seemed since I've left graduate school, and I've observed, that there's a change, there's a sea change in the conversation that's happening, and there seems to be more and more and more opening up to integrative research and integrative science. Where certain individuals can straddle different departments, so to speak, and weave together. And that's the direction that we need to be heading, is more and more towards the integrative and connecting. And yet there's a challenge for those who choose to do it, because as I found, I actually switched from physics to chemistry. I still did my PhD in physics, but my research ended up being in a chemistry lab. And then completely different languages. They have completely different ways of thinking, completely different ways of approaching an experiment, completely different language. I mean, it was such a learning curve just to switch to next of kin sciences. Physics and chemistry, you'd think that they would be pretty similar, but they were not. So I think this is the new conversation is how do we bring the elements together? Everyone has a little bit of a piece based on where they've been studying and putting their focus. But now we need to bring these puzzle pieces together. And that's why I so appreciate what you're doing to be a hub for bringing the puzzle pieces together. So I just want to thank you, Shamini, for being on Quantum Minds TV today. And if you have any final words of how you want to support people in their journey of healing, but also expanding human consciousness, here's, just an opportunity for those final words.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think what I'm learning from this conversation is that we can all rest in the joy of knowing the measurable and immeasurable aspects of our being for healing. And in the spirit of community, absolutely, it's our honor to help facilitate community, just like those cells, when they connect electrically, can help to foster health and healing for the organism. So it is with people. So, we want to invite people to join us in the community. It's a beautiful community of healers, scientists, educators, artists, who we all collectively share wisdom. We have free webinars every month, webinars on healing with our leading lights in healing, of course, and we have beautiful other offerings too, like an incredible science of healing course and other things. So do join us. You can go to webinarsonhealing.com, and that will connect you in with our free webinars. Our nonprofits link is chi.is, or Consciousness and Healing Initiative, or chi.is. If you'd like a copy of the book, and you do get a copy of the book, please do sign up for bonuses. If you go to healingourselvesbook.com, healingourselvesbook.com, you'll get a bunch of bonuses for signing up and saying, I bought the book here. We have wonderful video interviews with Deepak Chopra, Greg Braden, Donna Eden, Bruce Lipton, meditations from me, lots of goodies. So lots of resources for you on your healing journey.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Shamini. You have been an amazing guest for Quantum Minds TV, and I've so enjoyed this conversation. And please do go check out her work and follow those links so that you can find out more about Dr. Jain's work. And this brings us to the end of this incredible episode of Quantum Minds TV. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Quantum Minds TV. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Now, if you enjoyed it, please do rate, review, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and or Spotify. And if you really would like to be the first to receive full access and instant access as soon as each conscious conversation becomes available with each new guest, you can register at quantummindstv.com with your name and email. It's completely free to register, and it'll provide you with a secret link where you can then log in to access the entire conversations as soon as they're available and watch them at your leisure. So it's been a pleasure. And until next time, I'm Dr. Theresa Bullard White, and this is Quantum Minds TV.
This conscious conversation was created, produced, and recorded by Dr. Theresa Bullard White in collaboration with Dr. Shamini Jain and edited by Verse Content and Depth Perception Films. The theme music and intro videography were created by Tim Mountain of Even Mode Productions. Quantum Minds TV is a product of the Quantum Learning Academy.